Happy Friday, everybody. It is currently 6:41 this morning. I have not gone back to work yet, so I figured I would do a quick recording this morning just to do some previews. It is currently freezing in my house, so I'm all bundled up. I got the Penn State house shoes, despite how much they hurt me, I keep coming back. It's pretty sad, but hey, I'm here. I ride with my team. Nothing more can be said about it. So I'm not sure if we're going to post what I recorded yesterday because it was just a college football playoff reaction. Just trying to get some content out there because we weren't able to record this week, but I woke up early this morning and figured, you know what? Let's talk some predictions and previews, maybe a couple upset alerts. So let's get to it. This week is a pretty decent slate. Couple marquee matchups in the SEC. I marked down a couple games that I foresee potentially being upsets rather than a couple of the big game previews. But as far as the previews go, there's really two games that stand out and they really pop out on this sheet. First off, let's go with Georgia and Ole Miss. So Georgia is at Ole Miss and they are a 2.5 point favorite. Now, this is a playoff game. In past seasons, this isn't a playoff game because Ole Miss has 2 losses. They would be out of the mix. But things are different now, and with this 12-team format. So this is going to be an interesting one. Georgia could lose this game, and it puts them in a really, really bad spot given what they have down the stretch. Ole Miss, they're done. Their backs are totally against the wall. They cannot afford to have a third loss. They've already dropped 2 ugly, disappointing games. So their backs are against the wall. Even worse than Georgia, who only has that 1 loss. This is an interesting game. Georgia has looked like world beaters with a dominating performance over Texas. But they've also looked very vulnerable. They should have lost the game to a bad Kentucky, which they snuck by. On the flip side, you have Ole Miss who has 2 disappointing games and they were not predicted to have a season that went like this. So it's like they got the pieces. When can they put it together? Another thing to note about this game is Napier just got re-signed at Florida, whereas Lane Kiffin also just re-signs with Ole Miss, so there's maybe a little ease in at Ole Miss, given the fact that coach isn't leaving, although his performances have been slightly disappointing this year, but that's probably me just throwing some shade. Overall, this game, I think there's a couple things that go into effect with it. I think if Ole Miss wins this football game, it's because of their explosiveness on offense and their ability to capitalize on turnovers by Carson Beck. Carson has turned the ball over a lot. I think I saw a stat that he's thrown 8 picks in 3 games, which is not good. That's bad. You do the math. So if they can capitalize on turnovers and their explosive offense, they are at home. That is their route to a victory. Now on the flip side, Georgia. There's really nothing other than the fact that they're incredibly talented and they show up in big games. They've played some poor games against some bad teams, but they found a way to win. They've also played big games and they have outright dominated. That first half against Bama was horrendous, and then that second half is a total different team. But again, the ultimate deciding factor of that game were the turnovers by Carson Beck. They absolutely have to protect the football, and they need to jump out early on Ole Miss on the road. My prediction here, I'm going to go with Georgia. Again, they show up in big games. I don't see that changing. I can see it being a touchdown game. But give me the Dogs. That next big slate, the next matchup on this slate is number 11 Alabama, who are 2.5-point favorites at number 15 LSU. Now, these two teams are kind of similar in a way. I think that that you have all the talent in the world and pieces just aren't clicking and firing on all cylinders at the same time. This game is also a playoff game. I mean, you have both two-loss teams with the strength of schedule. They could get in with 2 losses if they are able to run the table and win out. But one more loss and they're done. I mean, there's no 3-loss team. There's too many talented teams this season, and there's no way you can justify putting a 3-loss SEC team over, say, a 1-loss Big 12 or ACC. It's just not going to happen. So this is a big time game. I mean, this is another playoff game in November, which is amazing for the sport. A couple things here to really note is I've said it a lot this season. The Alabama secondary has been suspect. They have not looked very good. This is not a Nick Saban secondary. They're not disciplined. They give up big plays. They're just not what Nick Saban would have had going. On the flip side, you have a kid, Garrett Nussmeier, at quarterback at LSU. He's good. He can play ball. If he can pass efficiently and not turn over the football, I think he has a real opportunity to light up a secondary in Alabama. The biggest thing that pops out on the sheet for this week, in my opinion, would be LSU's inability to stop a quarterback who can run the football. They have had terrible times defending a scrambling quarterback. A couple stats on that. Lenore Sellers rushed for 10 carries and 88 yards. That was before he got injured. Mind you, LSU had to come back in that game to end up winning it ultimately. If Lenore Sellers doesn't go out for South Carolina, you might be looking at a 3-loss LSU and this game doesn't matter. Marcel Reed at Texas A&M. Now, LSU was up against Texas A&M 17-7, 10 points, and they blew the lead once Marcel Reed came in the game. Marcel Reed rushed for 62 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Now, Lenore Sellers is a good football player. Marcel Reed's a good football player. But if they're able to do that, what do you think Jalen Milroe is going to be able to do? My bet would be his feet are going to give this LSU defense fits. Key to success. LSU has to absolutely get up early and use that crowded Death Valley. That is a terrible place to play football if you are an away team, especially if you're down early. It would be very tough for Alabama, and I'm not sure they have the discipline and they have it in them to be able to play poised and make a comeback if they get down late or get down early. I think that Nussmeier has the ability to have a game against this secondary, and if they can do it early and get up quick, that's a bad route for Alabama. They also have to, of course, limit Jalen Milroe's feet and force him to throw it more than he can run it. If Bama wants to win this game, they got to take the crowd out of it early. They have to get up early, and they have to hush that rowdy crowd in Death Valley. And I think you're going to need Jalen Milroe's feet more than any game you've needed him so far. I think he has the opportunity to have a big day on the ground. My prediction This is tough because I don't trust Alabama. I really don't. But I also really don't trust LSU. If this game was in Tuscaloosa, I'm taking the Tide without a doubt. But it's not. It's in Death Valley. Overall, I'm going to go with the Tide here. I just think that Jalen Milroe is a difference maker in this football game. I think the Tide sneak out with a very tight win in Death Valley. So, the fun ones. Upset alert. I'm going to rank these games. I have 4 of them. I'm going to rank them from least likely to most likely. And it starts off like this. Texas Tech over Colorado. Texas Tech just came off their biggest win of the year against Iowa State. They played great defense, holding Iowa State to 22, I believe, right around 20 points, and they're able to squeak out a victory. They typically score points and win games by the points they're scoring, but they did it with defense, and they did just enough on offense to get a huge win against a solid Iowa State football team. This game is at Texas Tech, and they can score, and they can score a lot of points. If they're able to play the defense they played against Iowa State, against Colorado, and they're able to find that spark on offense as they've had all year, I think this could be a prime spot for an upset. The line, I believe, was set at, I'm going to look at it right now, but the line is not very, Colorado minus 4 points. So, I mean, Vegas has it as a tight matchup. I don't see why it's not going to be a tight matchup. Overall, I'm still going to go with Colorado. They've proved me wrong, and there's no way I can bet against them. I mean, they have 2 of the best football players in college football that have been the difference makers in a conference that's not been that great. So you're able to rely on these 2 guys to win football games, and they're that good in the conferences, not the SEC or the Big Ten. So give me Colorado on that one, but I'm still putting that on my upset alert at number 4. Number 3, you have Utah. Oh, this is tough. I got 2 of them, and I'm not sure where to rank them. I'm going to go Utah over BYU. Checking out that line because it's another tight one. I believe, BYU minus 3 points. BYU has played some tight games this year. Maybe this one is looked at as an upset to me because I'm a huge fan of Kyle Whittingham and what Utah has been able to do the past couple of years. Now they're down, they're 4-4. It's their plans got thrown out the window when Cam got hurt. So it's just been kind of a tough go for them. But this is the Holy War. This is a very heated rivalry that people don't really realize just how much it is. This game means more than any game on the schedule for Utah at this point. BYU has greener pastures, bigger things to look at. So this could very easily be a look-ahead game for BYU, a team that virtually came out of nowhere and has tremendously played above what their caliber was supposed to be. I think BYU probably wins this game, but I mean, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Utah is able to sneak out a victory in a conference that has had so much parity and wildness happen across the whole season. But I think I'm probably not going to bet against BYU just based off of their body of work. But again, I'm going to rank this one in my upset alert at number 3. Number 2, you have Virginia Tech over Clemson. This game's at Virginia Tech, and this is a Virginia Tech football team that has been a lot better than their records show. I believe they're 5-4. They have a good football team. They have a couple losses that don't look great. The Rutgers loss isn't, looking great anymore. But that loss at Vanderbilt that we thought was horrendous at the beginning of the season has turned out to not be a terrible loss. And that is hilarious how that works, how we were disgusted at the beginning of the season when we saw that. Now we're looking back and we're like, wow, Virginia Tech had a competitive football game on the road to start the season at Vanderbilt. It's kind of impressive. But Virginia Tech has sort of caught a stride since then. I know they just lost a tough game at Syracuse, who I think has just been good for nothing except for upsetting people. They're just something about them I look at every time, and I kind of raise an eyebrow, like I don't know. See, Syracuse might sneak one in on somebody, but on the other hand, you have Clemson, who's reeling right now. I mean, they lost a football game to a good football team, mind you, but a game that they should have won, and they lost by multiple scores at home against Louisville. Louisville took themselves out of contention in the ACC, and Clemson was my pick. They were on an absolute tear prior to this game. I don't know what happened. They could have just slipped up here. They are still very much in contention. Now, the problem is that loss bounces them out of the ACC title picture, at least up to this point. They're still in contention. They still have something to play for. They're just going to need a little bit of help to get back in. But this can also be a spot where they just fold. I think Joe and I have talked about Dabo and Franklin being kind of in the same boat here where they're at. They keep winning and take care of business. Their jobs are fine. But it's like, all right, you have the disappointing one against the big teams. You're fine. You lose against the teams you're not supposed to lose against, and you do it again. Now eyebrows are being raised, and you're thinking, what's going on here? This is a tough game. This is a tough one to pick. This is why it's number 2 on my list. I don't have any locks for these upset alerts. I mean, I'd say Colorado probably is my biggest lock, but they're ranked 4 for a reason on this. Game's at Virginia Tech. I'm going with Clemson. I think Clemson has too much talent and they have too much to play for still. Despite what people think of Dabo, I still think he's an excellent football coach. He may not be willing to adapt to the modern game, which is a total different discussion, but he is a great football coach. He's won national titles for a reason. I'm going to go ahead and take Clemson on this one. Now, this last upset alert may surprise you because it doesn't make as much sense on paper as you may think. This is another Big 12 matchup, and this game is Kansas hosting 2-6 Kansas, unranked 2-6 Kansas. 2-6 Kansas hosting number 17 ranked Iowa State. Now, Iowa State just lost their first game of the season, 23-22 against Texas Tech, who's not bad. Texas Tech has 2 losses. They lost at home in a game that a lot of people were thinking they probably should have won. Now, they were favored to win it, so that's their first loss of the season. So, Nick, you're telling me a 7-1 football team is on upset alert against a 2-6 Kansas team? I'm here to tell you absolutely 100% they are, and this is as close of a lock that's not a lock for me, if there is such thing. Kansas is 2-6. Yes. Their biggest loss this season was 11 points. By 11 points. It wasn't against a good football team, but it was 11 points. They have 6 losses by a combined total of 30 points. Outside of their biggest loss, that means they lost 5 games by combined total of 19 points. This is a team, if the ball rolls their way a couple other times, that could easily be 6-2. And a lot of people don't talk about that because you see that record and you're like, this is disgusting. I mean, Kansas was predicted to be a team that could potentially compete for a Big 12 championship. Them, along with Utah and Oklahoma State, and now Kansas State, have really disappointed. So, that being said, man, Kansas still has some dudes on their team. They have a pretty decent defense overall. They have a quarterback who's a guy that Heisman got tossed around. Him and Heisman got tossed around in the same conversations quite a bit. I don't know, man. I just feel like Kansas is by far the best 2-6 football team in the country, and they could easily be 6-2 if a couple things go differently for them. Iowa State, to me, is at a level where I've talked about this before. You put teams in tiers. You have good football teams, great football teams, elite football teams. I think great football team or elite football teams win the big games. They don't drop against poor teams. You have great football teams who win most of their games. They don't beat the elite football teams. They're liable to lose to other great football teams. And then you have good football teams that win most of their games. They can compete with some of those greats. They may sneak one in on them, but they're also very liable to lose to a team they 100% should not have lost to. That's where I put Kansas or Iowa State. I think they're a good football team. They're not a great or elite football team. They're good, working their way up to try to be great. That being said, they just got their first loss of the season. If they lose this football game, it really throws a wrench in their season. They're in a prime spot to potentially lose this football game. The game is at Kansas now, at Kansas because it's played at Arrowhead, I believe. So the amount of fans could probably be even. So I'm going to throw out the home field advantage. Well, that's another thing that's been really complicated for Kansas season. They don't have a home stadium. So they've been playing between Sporting KC and Arrowhead, which is just not the same atmosphere and environment. But, man, this one I'm thinking about putting some money on. It is Iowa State's favored, but what people don't realize is Iowa State's only favored by 3 points. You would think a 7-1 football team would be favored by much more against a 2-6 football team, but I mean, obviously there's a trend here. This is the prime number one game on my list for an upset. So that's really all I got for this coming up week. Definitely apologize the fact that we weren't able to get something going. I got back into the States on Wednesday night. Joe had a couple things going on for this week. If one day we're rich and famous, we'll definitely be on time. But until that point, we are going to have to figure it out how we can figure it out. So take a look at this, like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.